Two Hearts That Beat as One by Frank Norris for the 1903 collection. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Two Hearts That Beat as One by Frank Norris.
Which puts it up as how you ain't never heard about that time that Hardenberg and Stroker, the Englisher, had a friendly go with bare knuckles, 10 rounds it was, all along a female woman? It is a small world, and I had just found out that my friend Bunt McBride, horse wrangler, miner, faro dealer, and bone gatherer, whose world was the plains and ranges of the great Southwest, was known of the three black crows, Hardenberg, Stroker, and Ali Bazan, and had even foregathered with them on more than one of their ventures for Cyrus Ryder's exploitation agency, ventures that had nothing of the desert in them, but that involved the sea and the schooner and the taste of the great-lunged Canarus trades. "You ain't never crossed the trail of that mournful history?"
I professed my ignorance and said, "They fought?"
"Mr. Man," returned Bunt soberly, as one broaching a subject not to be trifled with, "they sure did. Friendly like, you know, like as how two high-steppin' sassy gents figures out how to settle any little strained relations, friendly like, but considerable keen."
He took a pinch of tobacco from his pouch and a bit of paper, and rolled a cigarette in the twinkling of an eye, using only one hand, in true Mexican style. "Now," he said, as he drew the first long puff to the very bottom of the leathern valves he calls his lungs, "now I'm a goin' for to relate that same painful proceedin' to you, just so as you kin get a line on the consumin' and devourin' foolishness o' male humans when they's a woman in the wind." "Woman," said Bunt, waggling his head thoughtfully at the water, "woman is a weather breeder. Mr. Dixon, they is three things I'm skeered of. The last two I don't just rightly call to mind at this moment, but the first is woman. When I meets up with a female woman on my trail, I sheers off some prompt, Mr. Dixon. I sheers off. And Hardenberg," he added irrelevantly, "would 'a' took and married this woman, so he would. Yes, and Stroker would too." "Was there another man?" I asked.
"No," said Bunt.
Then he began to chuckle behind his mustaches.
"Yes, they was."
He smote a thigh.
"They sure was another man for fair. Well now, Mr. Man, lemme tell you the whole how. It began with me bein' took into a wild-eyed scheme that maverick, Cy Ryder, had cooked up for the Three Crows. They was a row down Gortamalar way, some gesabe named Palachi, Barreto Palachi, finding times dull and the boys some off their feed, ups and says to hisself, 'Exercise is what I needs. I will now take an overthrow to blame government.' Well, this same Palachi rounds up a bunch o' insurrectos and begins pesterin' and badgerin' and hectorin' the government, and rarin' round and bellerin' and making a procession of hisself, till he sure pervades the landscape. And before you knows what, lo and beholt, here's a real live revolution thing kyoodlin' in the scenery, and the government is plumb bothered. They rounds up the gesabe at last at a place on the coast, but he escapes as easy as how do you do. He can't, howsomever, get back to his insurrectos, the blame government being in possession of all the trails leading into the hinterland. So says he, 'What for a game would it be for me to hike up to 'Frisco and get in touch with my financial backers and conspirate to smuggle down a load of arms?' Which the same he does, and there's where the three black crows and me begin to take a hand. Cy Ryder gives us the job of taking the schooner down to a certain point on the Gortamalar coast, and there delivering to the agent of the Gazabo 3,000 stand of .48 Winchesters. When we gets this far into the game, Ryder ups and says, "Boys, here's where I cashes right in. You sets right to me for the schooner and the cargo, but you goes to Palachi's agent over crossed the bay for instructions and directions." "But," says the Englisher, Stroker, "this betting a blind play don't suit our hand. Why not?" says he. "Make right up to Mr. Palachi hisself." "No," says Ryder. "No, boys, you can't. The Señor is lying as low as a toad in a wheel track these days because of the pryin' and meddlin' disposition o' the local authorities. No," he says, "ye must have your palaver with the agent, which is a woman," and thereon I groans low and despairin'. So soon as he mentions female, I knowed trouble was in the atmosphere, and right there is where I sure loses my presence o' mind. What I should 'a' done was to say, "Mr. Ryder, Hardenberg, and gents all, you're good boys, and you drinks and deals fair, and I loves you all with a love that can never, never die for the terms o' your natural lives, and may God have mercy on your souls. But I ain't keeping case on this 'ere game no longer. Woman and me is mules in music. We ain't never made to ride in the same go-cart. Goodbye." That all is what I should 'a' said, but I didn't. I walked right plumb into the slough, like the mudhead that I was, and got mired for fair, just as I might 'a' knowed I would. Well, Ryder gives us a address over across the bay, and we fair hikes over there all along o' as cruel a rain as ever killed crops. We finds the place after a while, a lodgin' house all lorn and loony, set down all by itself in the middle o' some real estate extension like a teepee in a barren. A crazy, modern house, all gimcrack and woodwork and frostin', with never another place in so far as you could hear a coyote yelp. Well, we bucks right up and asks o' the party at the door if the Señorita Esperanza Ulivari, that was who Ryder had told us to ask for, might be concealed upon the premises, and we shows Cy Ryder's note. The party that opened the door was a greaser, the worst looking I ever clapped eyes on. It looked like the kind what'd steal the coppers off his dead grandmother's eyes. Anyhow, he says to come in, gruff like, and to wait poco tiempo. Well, we waited mucho tiempo, muy mucho, all a settin' on the edge of the sofy with our hats on our knees, like philly birds on a rail, and a countin' of the patterns in the wall paper to pass the time along. And Hardenberg, who's got to do the talkin', gets the fidgets by and by, and because he's only restin' the toes of his feet on the floor, his knees begin jiggerin', and along o' watchin' him, my knees begin to go, and then Stroker's, and then Ally Bazan's. And there we sat all in a row and jiggered. Great snakes, it makes me sick to the stomach to think o' the idjits we were. Then, after a long time, we hears a rustle o' silk petticoats, and we all grabs holt o' one another and looks scared like, out from under our eyebrows. And then, Mr. Man, they walks into that bunkhouse parlor the loveliest looking young female woman that ever wore hair. She was lovelier than Mary Anderson. She was lovelier than Lotta. She was tall and black haired, and had a eye, well, I dunno, when she gave you the littlest flicker of that same eye, you felt it was about time to take and lie right down and say, "I would esteem it, ma'am, a sure smart favor if you was to take and wipe your boots on my waistcoat, just so's you could hear my heart a beatin'." That's the kind of female woman she was. Well, when Hardenberg had caught his second wind, we begins to talk business. "And you're to take a passenger back with you?" says Esperanza after a while. "What for a passenger might it be?" says Hardenberg. She fished out her calling card at that and tore it in two and gave Hardenberg one half. "It's the party," she says,
that'll come aboard off San Diego on your way down and who will show up the other half of the card, the half I have here, and which the same I'm going to mail to him, and you be sure the halves fit before you let him come aboard. And when that party comes aboard," she says, "he's to take over charge." "Very good," says Hardenberg, mincing and silly like a cheesy cat lapping cream. "Very good, ma'am. Your orders shall be obeyed." He sure said it just like that, as if he spoke out of a story book, and I kicked him under the table for it. Then we palavers a whole lot and settles the way the thing is to be run, and finally, when we'd got as far as could be that day, the Señorita stood up and says, "Now, me good fellows," 'twas Spanish she spoke, "now, me good fellows, you must drink a drink with me." She herds us all up into the dining room and fetches out, not whiskey, mind you, but a great fat green and gold bottle of champagne, and when Alibazan has fired it off, she fills our glasses, dinky little flat glasses that look like flower vases. Then she stands up there before us, fine and tall, all in black silk, and puts her glass up high and sings out, "To the Revolution!" And we, all solemn like, says, "To the Revolution," and crooks our elbows. When we all comes to, about half an hour later, we're in the street outside, having just said good bye to the Señorita. We all are some quiet the first block or so, and then Hardenberg says, stopping dead in his tracks, "I pauses to remark that when a certain young female party, having black hair and a killing eye, gets good and ready to travel up the center aisle of a church, I know the gent to show her the way, which he is 6 feet 1 in his stocking feet, some freckled across the nose, and shoots with both hands." "Which the same observations," speaks up Stroker, twirling his yeller lady killer, "which the same observations," he says, "has my hearty endorsement and cooperation, savin' in the particular of the description of the gent. The gent is 5'11" high, 3 feet thick, is the only son of my mother, and has yeller mustaches and a buck tooth." "He don't qualify," puts in Hardenberg. "First, because he's a Englisher, and second, because he's up agin a American, and besides, he has a tooth that's bucked." "Buck or no buck," flares out Stroker, "what might be the meaning o' that remark concernin' bein' an Englisher?" "The fact of his being English," says Hardenberg, "is only half the hoe handle, t'other half being the fact that the first named gent is all American. No Yank ain't never took no dust from oft a Englisher, whether it were war, walking matches, or women." "But they's a Englisher," sings out Stroker, "not 40 miles from here as can nick the nose of a freckled Yank, if so be occasion require." "Now ain't that plumb foolish like," observed Bunt, philosophically. "Ain't it plumb foolish like o' them two gesabes to go flyin' up in the air like two he hens on a hot plate for nothin' in the world but because a neat looking female woman has looked at 'em some soft? Well, naturally we others, Ally Bazan and me, we others throws it into 'em pretty strong about bein' more kinds of blame fools than a pup with a bug, and they simmers down some, but along o' the way home I can see as how they're a glarin' at each other, and a drawin' theirselves up proud, like an presumptuous, and I groans again, not loud but deep, as the good book says. We has 2 or 3 more palavers with the Señorita Esperanza, and stacks the deck to beat the harbor police and the customs people and all, and to nip down the coast with our contraband. And each time we chins with the Señorita, there's them 2 locos steppin' and sidlin' around her, acting that silly like that me and Ally Bazan takes and beats our heads agin the walls so soon as we're alone just because we're that pisen mortified. Finally comes the last talky talk, and we're to sail away next day and mebbe snatch the little joker through,
or be took and hung by the Costa Guardies." "And good bye," says Hardenberg to Esperanza, in a fainting, die-away voice like a kitten with a cold. "And ain't we goin' to meet no more?" "I sure hopes as much," puts in Stroker, smirking so's you'd think he was a he milliner sellin' a bonnet. "I hope," says he, "our delightful acquaintanceship ain't a goin' for to end abrupt this a way." "Oh, you nice big Mister Men," pipes up the Señorita in English. "We will meet down there in Guatemala soon again. Yes, because I go down by the vapor carriages to morrow." "Unprotected, too," says Hardenberg, wagging his fool head, "and so young. Holy Geronimo, I don't know what more fool drivelling they had, but they finally comes away. Alibazan and me rounds 'em up and conducts 'em to the boat and puts 'em to bed like as if they was little or drunk. And the next day, or next night rather, about 1 o'clock, we slips the heel ropes and hobbles o' the schooner quiet as a mountain lion stalking a buck, and catches the out tide through the gate of the bay. Lord, we was some keyed up, lemme tell you, and Alibazan and Hardenberg was at the fore end of the boat, with their guns ready in case of being asked impertinent questions by the patrol boats. Well, howsomever, we nips out with the little jokers they was writ in the manifest as mining pumps and starts south. This 'ere pasear down to Guatemala is the first time I goes a gallying about on what the Three Crows calls blue water. And when that schooner hit the bar, I begins to remember that my stomach and inside arrangements ain't made o' no chilled steel, nor yet o' rawhide. First I gets plumb sad and shivery, and I feels as mean and poor as a prairie dog which has eat a horned toad back'ards. I goes to Alibazan and gives it out as how I'm goin' for to die, and I puts it up that I'm sure sad and depressed like, and don't care much about life nohow, and that present surroundings lack that certain undescribable charm. I tells him that I knows the ship is goin' to sink afore we get over the bar. Waves they was higher'n the masts, and I've rode some fair lively sunfishers in my time, but I ain't never struck anything like the rarin' and buckin' and high and lofty tumblin' that same boat went through with those first few hours after we had come out. But Alibazan tells me to go downstairs in the boat and lie up quiet, and by I do feel better. By next day I can sit up and take solid food again, and then's when I takes special notice o' the everlastin' foolishness of Stroker and Hardenberg. You'd have thought each one of them two mushheads was trying to act the part of an old cow which has had her calf took. They goes a moonin' about the boat that mournful it 'ud make you yell just out o' sheer nervousness. First one'd up and hold his head on his hand and lean on the fence rail that ran around the boat, and sigh till he'd raise his pants clean out of the top o' his boots, and then the other'd go off in another part of the boat, and he'd sigh and moon and take on fit to sicken a coyote. But by, or maybe 6 days to the good old Frisco, by, they two gets kind o' sassy along each t'other, and they has a heart-to-heart talk, and puts it up as how either one o' 'em 'ud stand to win so only the t'other was out o' the game. "It's double or nothing," says Hardenberg, who was something o' a card sharp for either you or me. "Stroke, and if you're agreeable I'll play you a round o' jacks for the chance at the Señorita. The loser to pull out o' the running for good and all." No, Stroker don't come in on no such game, he says. He wins her, he says, as a man, and not as no poker player. No, nor he won't throw no dice for the chance o' winning Esperanza, nor he won't flip no coin, nor yet wrastle. But, says he all of a sudden, "I'll tell you which I'll do. You're a big, thick, strappin' hulk of a two-fisted dray horse, Hardy, and I ain't no effete and degenerate one lunger myself. Here's what I propose, that we all takes and lays out a 16-foot ring on the quarter deck, and that the raw boned Yank and the stodgy Englisher strips to the waist, and all friendly like settles the question by Queensberry rules, and may the best man win." Hardenberg looks him over. "And what might be your weight?" says he. "I don't figure on hurtin' of you, if so be you're below my class." "I fights at 170," says Strokher. "And me," says Hardenberg, "at 175. We're matched." "Is it a go?" inquires Strokher. "You bet your great grandmammy's tortoise shell chessy cat it's a go," says Hardenberg, prompt as a hop frog catching flies. We don't lose no time trying to reason with them, for they is sure keen on having the go, so we lays out a ring by the rear end of the deck, and runs the schooner in till we're in the lee of the land, and she riding steady on her pins. Then, along about 4 o'clock on a fine still day, we lays the boat to, as they say, and folds up the sail, and having scattered resin in the ring, which it ain't no ring, but a square o' ropes on posts, we says all is ready. Ali Bazan, he's referee, and me, I'm the timekeeper, which I has to ring the ship's bell every 3 minutes to let 'em know to quit and that the round is over. We gets 'em into the ring, each in his own corner, squatting on a bucket, the timekeeper being second to Hardenberg, and the referee being second to Strokher. And then, after they has shuck hands, I climbs up on the chicken coop and hollers 'Time!' and they begins. Mister Man, I saw Tim Hennon at his best, and I saw Sayres when he was a top notcher, and likewise several other irregular boxin' sharps that were sure tough terriers. Also, I've saw two short-horned bulls arguin' about a question o' leadership, but so help me Bob, the fight I saw that day made the others look like a young ladies' quadrille. Oh, I ain't goin' to tell o' that mill in detail, nor by rounds. Rounds! After the first 5 minutes, they wa'n't no rounds. I rung the blame bell till I rung her loose, and Ali Bazan yells 'Break away!' and 'Time's up!' till he's black in the face, but you could no more separate them two than you could put the brakes on a blame earthquake. At about supper time, we pulled 'em apart. We could do it by then, they was both so gone, and jammed each one o' 'em down in their corners. I rings my bell good and plenty, and Ali Bazan stands up on a bucket in the middle of the ring and says, 'I declare this here glove contest a draw.' And draw it sure was. They fit for 2 hours steady, and never a one got no better of the other. They give each other lick for lick as fast and as steady as they could stand to it. Wrastlin', borin' in, boxin', all was alike. The one was just as good as t'other, and both willin' to the very last. When Ali Bazan calls it a draw, they gets up and wobbles toward each other and shakes hands, and Hardenberg, he says, 'Stroke, I thanks you a whole lot for as neat a go as ever I mixed in.' And Strokher answers up, 'Hardy, I loves you better'n ever. You's the first man I've met up with which I couldn't do for, and I've met up with some scraggy propositions in my time, too.' Well, they two is a sorry looking pair of birds by the time we runs into San Diego harbor next night. They was fine looking objects for fair, all bruises and bumps. You remember now we was to take on a party at San Diego, who was to show t'other half Esperanza's card and thereafterward to boss the job. Well, we waits till nightfall and then slides in and lays to off a certain pile of stone, and shows two green lights and one white every 3½ minutes for half a hour, this being the signal. They is a moon, and we can see purty well. After we'd signaled about an hour, mebbe, we gets the answer, a 1 minute green flare, and thereafterward we makes out a rowboat putting out and coming towards us. They is two people in the boat. One is the gesabe at the oars, and the other a party sitting in the hinder end. Ali Bazan and me.
and Stroker and Hardenberg, we's all leaning over the fence a watchin', when all to once I ups and groans some sad, the party in the hinder end of the boat being female. "Ain't we never goin' to get shut of 'em?" says I, but the words ain't no more'n off my teeth when Stroker pipes up. "It's she!" says he, gasping as though shot hard. "What?" cries Hardenberg, sort of mystified. "Oh, I'm sure a dreamin'," he says, just that silly like. "And the mugs we got?" says Stroker. And they both sets to swearing and cussin' to beat all I ever heard. "I can't let her see me so bunged up," says Hardenberg, doleful like. "Oh, whatever is to be done?" "And I look like a real genuine blown in the bottle pug," whimpers Stroker. "Never mind," says he, "we must face the music. We'll tell her these are sure honorable scars, got because we fit for her." Well, the boat comes up and the female party jumps out and comes up the let down stairway onto the deck. Without saying a word she hands Hardenberg the half of the card and he fishes out his half and matches the two by the light o' a lantern. By this time the rowboat has gone a little ways off and then, at last, Hardenberg says, "Welcome aboard, Señorita." And Stroker cuts in with, "We thought it was to be a man that'd join us here to take command, but you," he says, and oh, butter wouldn't have melted in his mouth, "but you," he says, "is always our mistress." "Very right, bueno, me good fellows," says the Señorita, "but don't you be afraid that they's no man is at the head o' this business." And with that the party chucks off hat and skirts, and I'll be Mexican if it wa'n't a man after all. "I'm the Señor Barrito Palachi, gentlemen," says he. "The gringo police, who wanted for to arrest me, made the disguise necessary. Gentlemen, I regret to have been obliged to deceive such gallant compadres, but war knows no law." Hardenberg and Stroker gives one look at the Señor and another at their own spiled faces. Then, "Come back here with the boat," roars Hardenberg over the side. And with that, upon me word, you'd have thought they two both were moved with the same spring. Over they goes into the water and strikes out hands over hands for the boat as hard as ever they can lay to it. The boat meets 'em. Lord knows what the party at the oars thought. They climbs in, and the last I sees of them, they was puttin' for shore, each having taken a oar from the boatman, and they sure was making that boat hum. Well, we sails away eventually without 'em, and a year or more afterward I crosses their trail again in Cy Ryder's office in 'Frisco. "Did you ask them about it all?" said I. "Mr. Man," observed Bunt, "I'm several kinds of a fool, I know it, but sometimes I'm wise. I wishes for to live as long as I can, and die when I can't help it. I does not, neither there nor there afterward, ever make no joke, nor yet no allusion about or concerning the Señorita Esperanza Palachi in the hearing o' Hardenberg and Stroker. I've seen, ye remember, both those boys use their fists, and likewise Hardenberg, as he says hisself, shoots with both hands." End of Two Hearts That Beat as One by Frank Norris.